Hey everyone, happy Friday. This week we have an edition full of defense news. Who will win European rearmament? Can the EU build a defense industry? Why European countries struggle to recruit soldiers? And a new paper on immigrant fertility in Denmark in our paper of the week. Europe is rearming and is set to boost defense spending by 800 billion over the next 4 years. And with quotas for European-made weapons, European defense stocks are surging. Contracts worth billions are set to flow to Europe's defense industry. So who is likely to profit the most from this spending spree? Let's start with Germany, already the biggest spender in Europe with 70 billion euro last year going to its defense industry and more with its new spending spree. Its defense giant Rheinmetall, Europe's biggest producer of NATO ammunition, makes high-demand tanks and artillery. It projects sales to increase 40% this year and already has a 55 billion euro backlog in orders, which means it has to scale quickly to meet it. But Italy could profit even more. Despite low defense spending at 1.5% of GDP, and limited plans to scale it up, it holds a large manufacturing industry. Firms like Leonardo and Fincantieri produce advanced aircraft, naval vessels, and armored vehicles. Italy is also well placed to secure more contracts from the Buy European trend. Its industry is strongly export-oriented and deeply integrated in European defense collaborations like Eurodrone. Even more important are its links to German industry. Fincantieri and ThyssenKrupp build submarines and warships together, and Leonardo supplies components for Airbus helicopters and produces tanks with Rheinmetall. More German spending means good times for Italian firms, even without increased Italian government spending. So the future is looking bright for German and Italian defense industries, but with winners there are also losers, at least relatively. Here we have to mention France. Unlike German and Italian integration, France has kept its defense sector independent, both out of sovereignty concerns and out of fear of not giving up trade secrets. Dassault's Rafale fighter jet is the French national alternative to collaborative projects like Eurofighter, and its naval group often prefers French-led shipbuilding to German and Italian joint ventures. Now that the EU is pushing joint procurement and development, European funds could flow to more integrated players than to French independent programs. And even though France is the second biggest exporter in the world, only 15% of its exports went to European countries. So with billions of euros in new contracts up for grabs, the rearmament race is set to reshape Europe's defense industry. The big winners will likely be Germany and Italy, thanks to their strong industrial base and deep integration into European supply chains. Despite all the billions in defense spending, increasing production remains the biggest challenge for Europe's defense industry. Essentially, the European defense industry is fragmented, making it difficult for companies to scale and raising costs and production times. That's why the EU wants countries to spend more, better, and European. First, it released its defense white paper, which aims to create a truly European defense market. It aims to have 35% of defense spending on collaborations, to lower prices, and improve industry consolidation by having the EU countries buy weapons together, suggests collaborations to replenish weapon stocks, and points to 7 critical gaps like missile defense or electronic warfare, where Europe needs to invest to compensate the US's departure. It also has a plan to buy weapons for member states like it did vaccines, but that is pretty unlikely. If the white paper is about where to invest, Rearm Europe or Readiness 2030 is about finding the money. First of all, the Commission allows member states to bypass budget rules and borrow 1.5% of GDP or 650 billion euros for defense spending. Then the EU has 150 billion euros in loans to member states to rapidly increase investment. But these loans should finance projects by 2 or more countries in a bid to create an EU-wide defense industry. And at least 65% of the components for these weapons programs must come from a set list of countries. These will include friendly countries like EU candidate countries, Norway, Switzerland, and Iceland, and countries that have a security partnership with the EU, like South Korea and Japan. But it crucially excludes the US, by excluding weapon systems where a non-EU country can restrict design, construction, or use. That covers most American military equipment in Europe, like F-35 fighter jets, Abrams tanks, or Patriot anti-air systems. Finally, the plan also allows the European Investment Bank to lend money to defense and security projects and wants to mobilize private capital, including household savings, for investments in defense. So, will these plans and billions really create a European defense market and industry? We'll have to wait and see if national politics gets in the way. At the same time as scaling up their weapons production, European countries want to increase their army sizes. But with personnel leaving, they are facing recruitment shortages. While better conditions like higher pay have failed to attract more professional soldiers. So to boost these numbers, countries like Italy and Germany are debating bringing back military conscription. Could it be a solution? Well, most countries downsized their militaries after the Cold War, shifting towards professional forces. Armies in the UK, Italy, and France are half as large compared to 20 years ago. Europe, including the UK, has about 1.5 million active military personnel, though Bruegel and Kew Institute studies suggest that Europe needs 300,000 additional troops to defend itself without the US. But an aging population, better career opportunities, and reluctance amongst young people opposing wars makes recruitment challenging, and European countries are far from their stated targets when it comes to recruitment. Out of the 5 largest European armies, only France manages to reach its recruitment quota. That's especially problematic when you consider that Poland, which recruits 20,000 soldiers every year, wants 100,000 volunteers. These shortages have led some countries to reconsider conscription, thinking that a mandatory draft among young people could fill the gaps. But would it work? Well, the biggest challenge is low support. In most European countries, a significant part of the population opposes military service, such as 53% in Spain, 47% in the UK, and 44% in Italy, according to a recent YouGov poll. Low support for conscription is firstly driven by lacking willingness to fight, with only about a third of EU adults saying that they would fight, and those numbers falling even further to 14% of Italians, 23% of Germans, and about a third of Spaniards. This is especially a problem for young people who are the most opposed to service in the armed forces. While the poll showed a majority support in France and Germany, young people who would actually serve were mostly opposed. So if politicians pursue conscription against domestic agendas, they risk backlash. Despite these challenges, 9 European countries already have some form of conscription. In the countries bordering Russia, 72% of Swedes, 73% of Finns, and 61% of Latvians support conscription. But on top of unmotivated Europeans, conscription faces another challenge, that of Europe's ethnic minorities who are unlikely to sign up for European armies and who have made poor conscripts in the past. In a recently resurfaced report from the 1990s from French conscription, ethnic minorities were far likelier to disobey orders and to disrespect their superiors than ethnic majority members. So while conscription might solve the numbers without an obvious threat, conscription faces challenges, not least in the public opinion, but also in delivering a coherent and cohesive army. Now time for our weekly brief. In England and Wales, judges are set to consider minorities, ethnic and cultural and religious backgrounds when sentencing according to new guidelines. The Justice Secretary criticized the move as a two-tier justice system, while conservatives fear it would disadvantage white offenders. At the Russian border, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are set to withdraw from the Ottawa Treaty, which banned anti-personnel mines. This is in preparation for aggression by Russia, which also doesn't follow the treaty. In Romania, far-right candidate George Simion is leading a recent poll for Romania's presidential election with 30% of the vote. He entered the race after another far-right candidate, Călin Georgescu, was blocked from running. The European Commission presented its plan to make steel and metal industries more competitive. It focuses on cutting high energy prices and import restrictions to prevent dumping on EU markets. In transatlantic news, the United States Agriculture Ministry has asked producers across Europe if they can export more eggs to the US, whose egg prices are ballooning. Looks like Easter is coming early this year. In immigration news, the Spanish town of Salt in Catalonia has seen 2 days of riots by migrants following the arrest of sub-Saharan imam. The imam was evicted from an apartment he had been occupying for 5 years without paying rent. In space news, the EU governments approved Ares-2, a 290 satellite network meant to rival Elon Musk's Starlink. Launching in 2030, it will provide secure communications for authorities like armed forces and broadband for business. In diplomatic news, the EU pledged 2.5 billion euros in aid for Syria. The support faces criticism after sectarian violence involving Syria's army killed 1,000 Alawites and Christians. It comes after foreign ministers recently met Syria's new president and former Al-Qaeda member Ahmed al-Shara and partly lifted sanctions. In financial news, the EU is going ahead with the digital euro, with its preparation phase ending in October. The digital euro would be a digital currency issued by the European Central Bank, but critics have concerns over surveillance, control, and privacy issues. Now time for our paper of the week. This week we have a paper on Denmark's restrictions to access for marriage for young immigrant women. Before 2002, 80% of male and 70% of female immigrants and descendants from non-European countries who were aged 18 to 25 and had lived at least 10 years in Denmark had married spouses from their parents' country of origin. As a result, a substantial amount of immigration to Denmark occurred through intermarriage or chain migration, making it the most important driver of permanent migration to Denmark. For Denmark looking to reduce immigration, this was a problem. That's why in 2002, Denmark prevented anyone living in Denmark younger than 24 from marrying someone from outside the EU. and it required couples to prove a stronger affiliation to Denmark than to other countries for a spouse to gain residency in Denmark. A declared aim of the reforms was explicitly to reduce arranged marriages between an immigrant in Denmark and a spouse from their country of origin. When Denmark implemented this policy, it delayed both marriages and the birth of children for immigrant women and their descendants. As a result of having children later, minority women were likelier to complete education. But it also led immigrants and their descendants to adopt more Western dating practices, cohabitating with their partners before marrying. And since the reduction in foreign marriages was replaced by a shift to marrying other immigrant descendants within the country, it reduced immigration to the country. While this policy effectively discriminated against ethnic minorities, it did reduce immigration and improve the integration of Denmark's ethnic minorities. Perhaps this paper will influence other European policymakers. That was it for this week's episode. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for your weekly dose of European news. And I'll see you next week.